Emma Carter had walked into many office events before, but that evening felt different from the moment she stepped inside the downtown Seattle hotel ballroom. The room glowed under warm chandeliers, people laughed and clinked glasses, and music drifted around her like a soft curtain. Normally she blended into these nights with ease, smiling for coworkers, making polite small talk, but tonight she carried a secret so heavy that every breath felt careful and every movement felt watched. It wasn't that anyone knew what she had done, it was simply that she feared they might see it on her face. The way guilt sometimes leaves small cracks for the world to notice, she hoped no one would read her eyes too closely, especially not Daniel Hayes, the man whose presence was already tugging at her heart the moment she spotted him across the room. Emma had not planned for any of this to happen months ago. She had been married to Michael for 8 years, and at first their life had been full of comfort and shared dreams. They had met in college in Vancouver, moved to Seattle for her marketing job, bought a small townhouse, and built a life that once felt steady and warm. But somewhere along the way things shifted, schedules grew heavier, conversations grew shorter, and those little moments that used to hold them together started slipping away. There were no dramatic fights or cruel words, just a slow drifting that seemed too small to name and too real to ignore. Daniel had appeared. During that drifting, he was a project manager from another department, someone she had only known in passing until a late meeting had forced them to work together on a stressful deadline. At first he had been nothing more than a friendly coworker offering her coffee and encouragement, but over time he became the person she talked to when she felt overwhelmed, the one who made her laugh on days where everything felt heavy. She told herself it was harmless, just connection, just support, but when his hand brushed hers one late evening and she didn't pull away fast enough, she realized that something dangerous had begun, and instead of stopping it, she let herself drift toward the warmth he offered. It never became anything physical, never crossed the line into something that couldn't be taken back, but the feelings were real, that quiet pull that made her aware of every word he said and every moment he stood too close. It was emotional, risky, and wrong, yet she had convinced herself she could keep it contained. She had promised herself that she would protect her marriage and protect her heart by ending it before it became something deeper. She had even rehearsed what she would say to Daniel tonight, simple words that would create distance without hurting him, words like, "We should stay co-workers," or, "I think this has gone too far," but the truth was she didn't know if she had the strength to say any of them. And then, as if the universe wanted to test her resolve, she saw Daniel moving through the crowd toward her with that familiar gentle expression, the kind of look that made her feel understood without explanation, the kind of look she hadn't received from Michael in a long time. His gray suit fit him well, his dark hair fell neatly across his forehead, and his smile carried that quiet warmth that had always drawn her in. She looked away too quickly, pretending to adjust her bracelet, hoping he wouldn't see how nervous she suddenly felt, but Daniel always noticed her even in a crowded room. "Emma," he said softly, stepping beside her, keeping his voice low so no one nearby would pay attention. "You look like you're holding your breath." She tried to laugh but it sounded thin. "I'm fine," she whispered, "just tired." But Daniel shook his head gently, his eyes studying her in a way that made her feel both safe and exposed. "No," he said. "Something's wrong, I can see it." His tone wasn't demanding, just sincere, and it made her chest tighten with all the words she didn't know how to say. She opened her mouth to answer, maybe to finally tell him that tonight would be the end of whatever they were. But before a single word escaped, the ballroom doors opened again behind them with a loud burst of applause from arriving guests. Daniel glanced over her shoulder, distracted by the sound, and Emma turned too, and the moment she did, her heart nearly stopped. Michael was standing in the doorway. He wasn't supposed to be there. He had told her he had late meetings with a client in Bellevue and might not make it home until after dinner. She had even texted him earlier wishing him luck with his meeting, and he had replied with a string of tired emojis. But now he walked in wearing a navy suit she hadn't seen in weeks, looking clean-shaven and rested, his eyes scanning the room with the warmth of someone who simply wanted to support his wife. The sight of him sent a wave of panic through her stomach, sharp and cold. Emma froze, her breath catching in her throat as Michael's gaze swept across the ballroom. He hadn't spotted her yet, but every second felt like a countdown. Daniel followed her stare, confusion growing in his expression, and when he realized who the man was, his posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. For a moment, none of them moved, and the air between them felt painfully tight. Emma felt like a thread pulled between two hands, stretched and fragile, close to breaking at any moment. Michael walked deeper into the room, waving at a couple he recognized, smiling with The ease of a man who believed his place in her world was safe. Emma swallowed hard, guilt clawing at her chest. She knew she had not technically cheated, not in the physical sense, but emotional betrayal wasn't something she could excuse away. She had crossed lines inside her heart, allowed feelings she shouldn't have allowed, and seeing Michael there, unaware and trusting, made that truth feel even heavier. Daniel stepped a little closer. His voice barely audible. "You didn't tell me he might come," he murmured, not accusing, just surprised. Emma shook her head quickly, whispering back, "He wasn't. He said he had meetings I didn't know." Her voice trembled despite her efforts to stay calm. Daniel looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Part concern, part pain, part something like resignation. Michael finally saw her, and his whole face brightened as he started walking her way. Emma's pulse pounded in her ears, and she instinctively stepped slightly away from Daniel, trying to create space before Michael reached them. Daniel stopped himself from stepping forward again, his expression tightening, understanding exactly what she was doing even without words. It hurt her to see the disappointment flicker across his face, but she couldn't risk letting Michael misunderstand the moment, not with everything already hanging by a thread. As Michael approached, Emma forced her breathing to steady. She tried to arrange her features into something calm and natural, something that didn't look like guilt or fear. Michael reached her with an affectionate smile, leaning in to kiss her cheek. "Surprise," he said warmly. "I wrapped things up early and didn't want you to come here alone." Emma exchanged a small, shaky smile. "I'm glad you're here," she said, though the words felt strange in her mouth, not because they weren't true, but because she was standing between two versions of herself. Michael noticed Daniel standing a few steps behind her, his expression curious. "Who's that?" he asked casually, not suspicious, just wondering. Emma's stomach flipped. For a brief moment she couldn't find her voice, but she forced herself to answer lightly. "Just a coworker," she said, keeping her tone even. She didn't say Daniel's name, didn't offer any extra detail, and Daniel seemed to understand the message, remaining silent, distant, almost invisible. Michael nodded, accepting the explanation easily, and placed a gentle hand on her back, unaware of how tense she had become under his touch. Around them the music played, laughter echoed, and everything looked normal from the outside. But inside Emma felt like the night had shifted, the ground beneath her feet trembling with the weight of truth she had never meant for anyone to see. And though no one else in that room could sense it, Emma knew deep down that her secret, once tucked safely inside private moments and quiet conversations, was now standing dangerously close to the edge, waiting for one wrong step to send everything crashing into the open. Michael's unexpected arrival changed the entire rhythm of the night, and Emma felt it immediately. It was as if the air around her thickened, making every breath feel heavier. He stood beside her with the ease of a husband who still believed their marriage was steady and unshaken, unaware of the storm that churned behind her careful smile. He slipped his arm lightly around her back as they stepped farther into the ballroom, greeting coworkers and exchanging small talk. And though Emma responded politely, her mind kept drifting toward the man standing across the room, the one she was trying so hard to forget. Daniel watched from a distance, trying to appear indifferent, but the tension between them hovered like a shadow waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Emma wished she could calm herself long enough to think clearly, but guilt and panic collided in her chest, making her heart race with every step she took beside Michael. His presence should have brought her comfort, should have reminded her of the years they had built together, the life they had promised to protect, but instead she felt a painful ache beneath her ribs, the kind that comes when the past and present finally crash into each other. She had made a choice months ago to let something emotional grow between her and Daniel, something that felt small at first but had become powerful enough to unsettle everything she thought was stable. Now that choice stood in the room with her, visible and vulnerable. She hoped Michael wouldn't sense anything unusual, but she knew her own eyes might betray her if she wasn't careful. Michael guided her toward a table where her coworkers were seated. He pulled out a chair for her like he always did, small gestures that reminded her of the man he had been from the start. "I'm really proud of you," he whispered before sitting beside her. "You've worked so hard for this project. I wanted to see you shine tonight." Emma gave him a gentle smile, but it felt fragile, like paper stretched too thin. She nodded politely while fighting the sinking feeling in her stomach. She wished she could accept his kindness without the weight of her secret crushing her from the inside out. Every few minutes, her gaze drifted instinctively toward Daniel. Even though she tried to keep her attention on Michael, Daniel stood near the far wall, pretending to hold a conversation with a coworker. But his eyes kept flicking back to her. Watching, waiting, he was trying not to show it, but she knew him well enough to see the tension in his shoulders, the tightness in his jaw. He looked torn between wanting to protect her and wanting to walk away, and neither option seemed to ease the pain behind his expression. Emma turned back to Michael, trying to stay grounded. He was talking about something funny that had happened at work that morning, and for a moment she almost believed everything could go back to normal. But then Michael followed her glance again, this time more sharply, noticing the direction she kept looking. His voice softened. "You keep staring over there," he said with a light chuckle. "Do I know him?" It was an innocent question, but it struck her like a blow, tightening every muscle in her body. She smiled quickly, too quickly. "Oh, just a coworker," she answered, her tone too casual, too smooth. Michael nodded, accepting the answer easily, but there was a small flicker in his eyes, a faint trace of curiosity that wasn't there before. Emma felt her pulse thrum uncomfortably against her neck. She hated the feeling of hiding something from him, hated how easily a simple question now made her heart lurch. This was not who she wanted to be, not the wife she had promised to remain, yet she couldn't undo the choices she'd made. The dinner portion of the gala began, and servers moved around the room with plates. Laughter rose from nearby tables, and light music played above the chatter, but inside Emma, everything remained unsettled. Every sound felt distant. Every smile felt forced. She felt caught between two men who represented two different versions of her life, one she had built carefully for years and one she had stumbled into without meaning to. The more she tried to calm herself, the more she felt the truth slipping closer to the surface, threatening to reveal everything she had buried. Daniel shifted closer during a break in the program, drifting toward the edges of her table without drawing attention. He didn't speak at first, just lingered near the decorative plants behind her seat, pretending to check his phone. Emma tried to ignore the way her heartbeat changed when she sensed him near, but she couldn't stop her emotions from reacting. It was a quiet pull she had tried to deny all night, yet it remained stubborn and real. When Michael excused himself for a moment to greet someone from his company, Daniel seized the chance, stepping closer until his voice could reach her without anyone noticing. "Are you all right?" he asked, barely above a whisper. Emma nodded quickly, though her expression told the truth he could always read. "I didn't know he was coming," she said quietly, unable to hide the tremor in her voice. Daniel exhaled, his eyes softening. "I know," he murmured. "But this changes things, Emma. We can't keep pretending it's not affecting you." His tone wasn't harsh, but it carried the weight of something final, something she had feared hearing all night. She swallowed hard, her throat tightening. "Don't start this now," she whispered, glancing around nervously. "Please, not here." Daniel shook his head slightly, leaning closer but keeping a respectful distance. "I'm not trying to start anything," he said gently. "But you look scared, and I can't just stand across the room watching you fall apart." His words hit her with painful accuracy because that was exactly how she felt, pulled in two directions, unable to hide it much longer. Before she could respond, Michael returned to the table, smiling warmly. Daniel straightened instantly, stepping back into the shadows of the room. Emma prayed Michael hadn't noticed anything unusual, but when he sat beside her again, she saw him glance briefly toward the direction Daniel had been standing. His expression carried the faintest hint of confusion, and though he said nothing, Emma felt dread coil tighter inside her stomach. The gala program continued, but the emotional storm inside Emma only grew. Every time Michael reached for her hand or brushed her shoulder, she felt a mixture of affection and guilt that made her chest ache. She didn't want to hurt him, didn't want to let her marriage slip away, but she also couldn't deny the truth she had been avoiding for months. Something between her and Michael had broken long before Daniel ever became part of the picture, and she didn't know how to fix it, or if fixing it was even still possible. After the awards section ended, guests stood up to mingle again, and Michael stepped away to grab drinks for them. Emma stood alone for a moment near the center of the ballroom, her hands trembling slightly. She felt like she was balancing on the edge of a cliff, unsure which direction she was meant to fall. That was when Daniel approached again, this time more determined, his expression serious and steady. "Emma," he said quietly but firmly, "we need to talk, not here, not now, but soon. You can't keep living like this." She shook her head, panic rising. "Daniel, please stop." But he continued, "You deserve honesty, and he deserves it too." His words cut deep because they were true, brutally true, and Emma had no argument left to give. She felt her eyes sting with emotion, the weight of everything pressing against her more than before. Daniel stepped back, giving her space, but his eyes didn't leave hers. I care about you, he whispered. But I won't be a secret you have to hide in a room full of people. Emma felt tears threaten, but she blinked them away quickly. The last thing she needed was to fall apart in front of everyone. Daniel offered her one last look, torn, longing, resigned, and then he walked away before she could say anything more, disappearing into the crowd with a finality that made her chest feel hollow. Emma stood alone for a moment, breathing shakily, trying to regain control, but her emotions were tangled beyond repair. She wished she could run, escape the room, escape the night, escape the weight of her decisions, but she stayed rooted to the floor, unable to move, unable to choose. Aside in the battle tearing her apart, a moment later, Michael returned with 2 glasses in his hands, but his expression had changed completely. His smile was gone, replaced by a serious, searching look she hadn't seen in years. He approached her slowly, his eyes never leaving her face, and in that moment Emma knew something inside him had shifted too, something that would soon force every hidden truth to the surface. Whether she was ready or not, Michael walked toward Emma with a seriousness she wasn't prepared for. His steps were slow but firm, the kind that came from a man who had begun noticing things he never expected to see. The music around them faded into background noise, the chatter of the crowd blurred into a distant hum, and all Emma could focus on was the weight in Michael's eyes, something tight, something unsettled, something new. She felt the air shift, as if the room had suddenly grown colder, and she knew the moment she had been afraid of was finally here. He handed her the glass he brought, but she didn't lift it. Her hands felt too unsteady. Michael studied her face with a gaze that seemed to search past her smile, past her calm facade, past every barrier she had tried to hold up all night. Emma, he said quietly, but his voice carried a strength she hadn't heard in a long time. What's going on with you? She forced a small smile, but it trembled at the corners. Nothing, she said. I'm just tired, long week. Michael shook his head slightly, his jaw tightening. No, he replied softly. It's not that, I can see it, you're somewhere else tonight. I've been feeling that for a while now. His words hit her harder than she expected, and she felt her heart twist painfully. She had spent months pretending everything was fine, pushing down her doubts, hiding her confusion, telling herself the problem would pass, but hearing him say it aloud made her realize that her silence had only deepened the distance between them. Michael, she whispered, her voice catching. I don't want to talk about this here. But he stepped closer, lowering his voice. Then when? He asked. Because I've been waiting for you to look at me the way you used to, and tonight I finally realized that maybe you've been looking at someone else. The words sank into her like ice, and she felt her breath leave her chest in a sharp exhale before she could respond. Michael glanced around the room and spotted Daniel standing near the bar, talking to no one, staring at nothing, lost in the same storm Emma was drowning in. The moment Michael's eyes locked onto him, something inside him shifted. His expression didn't explode into anger or jealousy, it just changed, as if he suddenly saw a piece of a puzzle he had been trying to solve for months. It's him, isn't it? He asked quietly, not accusing, not shouting, just asking, and that calmness made it even harder for Emma to breathe. She shook her head weakly. Michael, it's not what you think, she whispered, but he stepped closer, his voice gentle but steady. Then tell me what it is. The truth pressed against her throat like a stone she couldn't swallow. She wanted to speak, but no words came out. The silence between them grew louder than the music around them, louder than the laughter, louder than the clinking glasses. Michael took a slow breath, and in that pause she saw the exact moment his heart cracked, not shattered, just cracked, enough to change everything suddenly. Overwhelmed, Emma looked away, staring at the floor because she couldn't bear to look at the pain on Michael's face. She didn't want to break him, didn't want to lose him, didn't want to betray what they once had. But she had already let her heart wander too far. Daniel had slipped into the part of her life she wasn't supposed to share with anyone, and now that truth lived between them like a fragile shadow waiting to reveal itself. Michael reached for her hand, but she flinched without meaning to, and that tiny involuntary reaction told him everything he needed to know. His hand froze in the air, then slowly dropped to his side. The silence stretched, filling with all the questions he didn't want to ask. How long? He whispered, barely audible. Michael? She tried again, but he shook his head. Just answer me. She swallowed hard, trying to find the right words, something honest but not cruel, something gentle but real. Yet nothing she thought of felt right. Nothing felt enough to repair what was breaking right there in front of them. Finally she whispered, I don't know. Because that was the closest thing to the truth she could manage. It wasn't a confession, but it wasn't a denial, and that was enough to send another crack through Michael's expression. He looked away for a moment, his hand running through his hair as he tried to steady himself. "I trusted us," he said softly. "I trusted you." Emma felt tears burn her eyes, but she blinked them back quickly. She didn't want to cry, didn't want to make him think she was playing the victim. She knew this pain belonged to him, and she had caused it, and nothing she said could soften the blow. Before either of them could speak again, Daniel approached from behind, drawn by the tension he could feel even from across the room. He kept a respectful distance, but his presence only confirmed everything Michael feared. Michael turned slowly, facing Daniel for the first time that night. The two men exchanged a long, tense moment of silence, not violent, not loud, but unbearably heavy. Daniel opened his mouth to say something, but Michael raised a hand slightly, stopping him. "I think I already know," Michael said quietly. Daniel closed his mouth, guilt settling across his expression. He didn't step closer, didn't defend himself, didn't try to claim innocence. He just nodded once slowly, as if accepting whatever judgment Michael had already formed. Emma watched the two men she cared about stand inches apart, both hurting for different reasons, both trying to remain calm for her sake. It made her chest ache so deeply she almost wanted to run from the room. "Michael," Daniel finally said, his voice steady but soft. "It's not what you think, but I won't pretend I haven't cared about her." Emma gasped quietly, but Daniel didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on Michael, refusing to hide or lie. Michael exhaled shakily. "I can see that," he said. "I'm not blind." The honesty between them made the air feel even heavier. Emma lifted her hand to her chest, trying to steady her breathing. "Daniel," she whispered. "Please." Daniel looked at her for the first time, but her voice cracked with too much emotion to finish her sentence. He took a step back, giving her space, giving Michael room, refusing to come between them more than he already had. Michael turned back to Emma. "I don't know what's happening to us," he said. "But I can't stand in a room pretending everything's fine when it isn't." Emma swallowed the rising lump in her throat. "Michael, I'm sorry," she whispered, and she meant it with everything she had. Michael nodded slowly. "I believe you're sorry," he said. "But sorry doesn't erase what you feel." His voice broke slightly on the last word, and that small crack nearly shattered her completely. The ballroom suddenly felt too bright, too loud, too open. Emma felt every eye could turn toward them at any moment. She tried to speak, but her voice barely formed more than a breath. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. Michael nodded again, pressing his lips together. "I know," he said. "But sometimes hurting someone doesn't require wanting to." They stood for a moment in painful silence, and then Michael stepped away first, his eyes shining with sadness he refused to let fall. "I'm going home," he said quietly. "We can talk later when we're alone." Emma reached out instinctively, but he stepped just out of reach, not harshly, not angrily, just gently enough to show that something inside him had pulled back. He walked toward the exit with slow, steady steps, his shoulders tense, his head slightly down. The sight of him leaving felt like the ground collapsing beneath her feet. She didn't chase him, not because she didn't want to, but because she knew the conversation he needed couldn't happen here in a crowded ballroom full of co-workers and strangers. She stood perfectly still, unable to move, barely able to breathe. Daniel stayed behind her, giving her space but refusing to leave. "Emma," he said softly. "I'm so sorry." She didn't turn around, didn't speak, didn't trust her voice not to break completely. He took a small step closer, hesitation in every movement. "I never meant to pull you into something that would hurt you like this." Emma closed her eyes, tears slipping out despite her attempts to hold them back. "I don't blame you," she whispered. "This was my choice." Daniel exhaled, pained by her truth. "Tell me what you need," he said gently. "Just tell me and I'll do it." She shook her head weakly. "I don't know what I need," she whispered. "Everything feels broken." Daniel looked at her with a mixture of heartbreak and worry. "Do you want me to leave you alone?" he asked softly. She thought for a long moment, the ache in her chest deep and throbbing. "I think," she finally whispered, "I need to go home." Daniel nodded slowly, respecting the boundary without question. "Then go," he said gently. "Be with him, talk to him, I'll stay out of the way." His voice carried no bitterness, only sincerity. Emma finally turned around to face him. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I never wanted any of this to happen." He offered a sad, small smile. "I know," he said. "Sometimes feelings grow in places we didn't plan for." He didn't reach for her hand, didn't step closer, didn't break the respectful distance between them. He just held her gaze for one last moment, letting her See all the emotions he wasn't saying out loud. Emma took a shaky breath, turned away, and began walking toward the exit where Michael had disappeared minutes earlier. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if she was carrying the weight of two different futures on her back. She didn't know what she would find when she got home, didn't know if her marriage could survive what had happened tonight, didn't know if her heart could ever untangle the feelings she had tried so hard to control. But she walked anyway because the truth was no longer something she could outrun, no matter how much she wished she could. And as the ballroom doors closed behind her, Emma knew her life was about to change and nothing, not love, not regret, not apology, would ever make it simple again.